I'm Michael McKenzie. I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which I'm sitting at this point is the unceded territory of the Musqueams, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, and I'm very grateful to be able to call this my home. So just to introduce what we'll be talking about, and Anthony's going to lead off, but basically this work is supported by a vast number of people in all regional cancer centers at BC Cancer and many patient partners and partners in care in communities. So I would just want to acknowledge this is work that a lot of people have contributed to. And basically we've labeled it EPIC, as you'll see on the slide. And it's a project that you're going to hear about, in which we're trying to introduce a palliative approach to cancer care, and therefore really bring about truly patient-centered care for patients with high needs. So without ado, I'd like to hand over to Anthony, who's going to introduce the project. And most of all, just before he gets started, I think Anthony is doing an awful lot of credit. We have been trying to run this project at a time of a lot of change in our organization, and he's shown tremendous humor and energy for it. And thank you, Anthony. But over to you.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks, Stuart. So Anthony Portino, project manager. I just want to acknowledge I'm also working and presenting from the unceded territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coast Salish nations. And we also have no conflicts of interest to declare. I will also have to be leaving 15 minutes early, so I'll be around for part of the questions and answers, but I am co-host of a workshop at the BC Cancer Summit that got scheduled to start right after this presentation ends, so I need to leave a little bit early to prepare for that, so my apologies. Michael is certainly well situated to answer your questions when I'm not around. And of course, it doesn't want me to forward. There we go. So as you probably saw there, we are sponsored by the Canadian Partnership Against Cancer. We are a 5-year project, and we do call it the Early Symptom Indicators for Cancer Care. We started off as the Early Palliative Integration into Cancer Care project, but of course, as many of you know, patients have problems with that word around palliative sometimes, even though this is about an early palliative approach into care. And so we use early symptom indicators to make sure that people feel included and understand the reasons why they're being incorporated. Palliative, of course, being simply symptom management and psychosocial issues in interprofessional care. It is not strictly limited to end-of-life palliative care. So within cancer care, repeat symptom screening in the journey, and these are some, like, just a couple of the bullets. There's a lot of research even within Canada to show that it has a lot of beneficial impacts, but the big ones are improved quality of life for the patients, better end-of-life treatment decisions and place of death, which is an important marker in the quality of death within cancer care, and improved health system efficiencies. And I love that word, efficiencies. It certainly does. Research has shown advantages financially for systems that incorporate an early approach to care and ongoing symptom screening, but also it better uses the healthcare providers' professions working within scopes of practice and sharing that patient care in a more interprofessional manner, which leads again to those system efficiencies. EPIC itself is a quality improvement project to assess and work on the integration of early screening into standard care. And again, to work on increasing those efficiencies and using repeat cycles of little projects to improve the integration and take feedback from the people that are actually using it and change and implement the model in better and better ways, and also to create sustained change. So we're not just a research project, we're quality improvement, and what we create is meant to be permanently established. And so from this perspective, we start off as a pilot. So patients receiving palliative radiation and those with incurable breast and gastrointestinal cancers were our starting points. And these are both sort of like broad populations, good understanding of the advantages of an integrated early approach to care. And so it gives us a broad group of patients to understand the impacts of our work. And we decided to do these at 2 regional cancer centers, Vancouver, which is certainly the biggest and most complex cancer center in BC, and also Prince George, which is the smallest, with great integrative teams. They often talk about being nimble and able to change and adapt and try things out in a way that becomes much more difficult in one of the larger centers. Vancouver being large means that what we learn there is likely going to be more readily adaptable into the other centers. And from Prince George, we particularly get to take advantage of their rural and remote care, because they deal with the northern half of British Columbia, and also much higher use of the community oncology care sites. So we can understand more about the interactions of what we're doing within the cancer center relative to those in the province. I also just want to acknowledge, as Michael did earlier, that as a CPAC project, there are other groups across Canada that are doing similar work. BC is particularly large, both from the perspective of repeat symptom screening and the early approach of palliative care, combined with that symptom screening and the scope of our education. So we share a lot of what we're learning out across Canada as well. So we'll start off, the primary focus here is that patient symptom screening intervention. And the way that we've set this up is not at every single patient visit within the cancer system, but rather focusing on the visits with the physician or nurse practitioner appointments, where the patients will actually spend some time consulting with their oncologist or nurse practitioner about what's going on in their treatment and their care. And so what happens is that the patients will complete a set of patient report outcome measures, or PROMs, and we've listed the primary ones there. The ESAS, many of you are probably familiar with, Canadian Problem Checklist; malnutrition screening tool, the EQ5D5L. The ESAS, MST, and EQ5D5L are validated tools. Canadian Problem Checklist is very well established. But we also have an additional question on advanced care planning and medical assistance in dying, information needs and support for patients. Not all of these are run at every single session. So the ESAS is at every single visit, but the other ones are for baseline and then either repeat at 1 or 2 months. The ACP and EQ5D5L, for example, are at 2-month cycles. And the reason is that these change much more slowly. And so we can reduce patient burden by not having to ask all of them all of the time. The screening started off only being in clinic on iPads, but thanks to COVID and the necessity of starting to do things remotely, we were able to eventually start also collecting the screening data online. And all of this feeds into a internal system, which we call POSI, that helps us to track and trend these results. The other thing to note is that our first screen is at the second oncologist or nurse practitioner visit. And this is because both healthcare providers and our patient partners in our studies identified that trying to do a large bank of questionnaires before they've even met with that oncologist the first time was maybe not appropriate and difficult for the patient that is already going in with a lot of questions, a lot of things swirling in their mind. So we start at that second visit. And this has an important impact that when we get into the results, I'll talk about a little bit more. We also have a built-in review of the trended screens. So they don't just do the screen, but members of the interprofessional team are expected to review the screening afterwards before they see the patient. And we actually have dedicated nurse follow-up time to review 15 minutes to review that screen before the oncologist or nurse practitioner appointment, whenever possible. And because of this, we've really had to do a lot of model of care work, integrating this into how service is delivered for these patients. And so we have efficient workflows that we've developed. We've had to work with the clerks, the other interprofessional healthcare teams, to make sure that everything is as smooth and as efficient as possible for that review and possible triggering of urgent responses when needed. And one example of that in particular that came up and created a barrier for us with the rollout of virtual screening with COVID, was that we actually have a question on suicide ideation. About 1% of our patients are actually indicating suicide ideation thoughts within the last week. But you have to be prepared to create wraparound care, and that becomes much more difficult with virtual screening. How do you respond right away? How do you look after that? And we actually consulted with the risk people within BC, as well as with teams across Canada that were doing this. And we were the first to actually have to try and get something set up to deal with this directly for virtual screening. The patients also receive a copy of their trended results. And please go forward. And then it jumped. There we go. And so this is an example of what a screen would look like. So this person has had 7 screens. And so you can see the trended results. On the left, you see the ESAS there showing up and down. And that 4th visit, the patient was particularly stressed. Down below it, the malnutrition score. And again, that number 3, that is considered a critical intervention point, which requires a mandatory review by dietitians. And then the Canadian problem checklist. This is reviewed by the nurses, and they will pick out things that are particularly relevant to patient and family counseling and the social workers, and make sure that they discuss those for the flag items, or if there's a lot of things in the Canadian problem checklist, they may also want to talk about specific parts. But it's important to note that the nurses work collaboratively with the patients while looking at these results to help identify what the patient would prioritize for themselves in terms of their symptoms. But something like, if you look at tiredness, that number 9 and the pain number 8, those are, and because they're above 7, those are a mandatory check-in no matter what, regardless of what else the patient might want to prioritize. Okay, and I'm getting funny delays here. There we go. I feel like I'm missing. Yes, there we go. Healthcare provider education. So this is our other intervention that I commented on earlier. And so if we're expecting our healthcare providers to be implementing an early approach to palliative care, we have to make sure that they feel confident in the skills that they have to actually do that. And so because the long-term vision also is that this will be spreading over time to other patient populations and to the other centers within BC Cancer, our education focused on BC Cancer provincially. And the 2 things that we focused on in particular were serious illness conversations. And you can see there, EPIC has helped train 152 people in serious illness conversations, which is a sort of guided way of talking patients through issues of serious illness. And that brings us to a total of up to 206 people within BC Cancer with that training, as well as the LEAP training, which is a palliative skills course by Pallium Canada. It's a pan-Canadian sort of baseline standard in palliative skills training. And by December 8th, we will have sponsored 130 people in BC Cancer to get trained in LEAP. So some of our results. 824 patients have been enrolled or offered enrollment in EPIC. And these numbers are from where we started, July 15th until September 30th, which is our latest data pull. And we note that about 5% are declining EPIC outright for various reasons. And we hope that the change in the name will help decrease that a little bit, because they're not going to be so concerned about the word palliative. There have been 853 symptom screens completed. And so I just want to note here that we rolled out first in palliative radiation in Prince George and palliative radiation first when we opened up in Vancouver. In Prince George, because of restrictions in nursing and clerk resourcing, we're only running in the GI clinics there right now. And in breast and GI in Vancouver, again, because of nursing availability, we've had to start clinic by clinic to make sure that the nurses didn't get overwhelmed. But this predominance of the palliative radiation produces a little bit of a hitch. If you remember that, I said that we don't introduce EPIC until the second visit with an oncologist or nurse practitioner. But 2/3 of palliative radiation patients have no second follow-up visits. And therefore, at the moment, about 2/3 of our patients who qualify for screening do actually end up not receiving it. This is of great concern to us, and we're looking at, we're now in discussions to see if we can at least get that ESAS screening at their first visit before their first visit with the healthcare provider. The other thing that has impacted is that when we start off, we were doing enrollment of every single person that qualified within our patient populations, within the environments. And we found that, again, this created a little bit of problem for, because of limited clerk and nursing capacity. But also we were finding that for some patients, just as an example, within palliative radiation, prostate and breast cancer patients who are receiving prophylactic treatments would have an ESAS score, for example, of all zeros or maybe zeros and ones. And when the nurse would check in, just to make sure everything was okay on the screen, the patient would say, yeah, I'm just doing great. And so the nurses were documenting less than 1 minute, even though in their scheduling, they have been allocated 15 minutes. So this was not considered efficient use of resources and time. And so instead, we've moved to this enrollment by physician or nurse treatment based on an algorithm identifying patients who are either have symptom burden or are likely to have a symptom burden based on their current space within their cancer trajectory. And again, our numbers also went down a bit when COVID created challenges because we had no virtual screening when COVID came in, and it took us 6 to 7 months to get our virtual screening in place. We also find that some patients have the ability to do them online, but they would prefer either to do them by telephone call, which takes more time, or wait until they're in clinic to be able to do them on an iPad. So we're going to look at some results. So we do collect a lot of data, and we certainly have a lot of data from the ongoing screens that we do. The one that I think is really critical is that first one there, the highly stressed patients from ESAS. So a highly stressed person is having any ESAS score of 7 to 10, or having 3 or more screens of 4 to 10. And for this value, when you say 58 to 67%, remember, if we look at these over time, it is going to vary a little bit. And I didn't think it was fair to just say, here's an average, because you will see that some of these vary. But we can say, 2 out of every 3 people are considered to be highly stressed by the ESAS at their first screen. Stressed patients in the CPC, or Canadian Problem Checklist, we do see, and I've sort of highlighted on that third line down for the CPC, 10 or more CPC items, so stressed or highly stressed, is 1 in 4 to less than 1 in 3 of all of our patients. For malnutrition, from the malnutrition screening tool, which is a score of 3 or more, indicating a warning flag that they're either experiencing malnutrition or at high likelihood of experiencing malnutrition shortly, that is 1 in 10 to 1 in 3 patients. And we do have those patient and family counseling flags. And as I mentioned, we have standard key check-in items. Again, 1 in 10 to 1 in 3 patients, depending on where they are in the system. I'd also like to identify that within the CPC, we do have some items that consistently score at 40% of the time checked off. So that's 4 out of 10 patients at any point in time are checking them off. And they include depression and anxiety. So again, part of that patient family counseling concern, as well as physical symptoms of constipation. In the CPC, it's constipation, diarrhea, and sleep. And so we are actually currently exploring integrating 2 additional validated questions on sleep and constipation, integrating those into the ESAS to capture better granularity, because we are having to check in with so many patients on those items. I also noted that we had added a question on advanced care planning needs. And we do see that since that's been there, along with the education we've done on serious illness conversations and the LEAP training, that for EPIC patients, we have seen a significant increase in engagement around advanced care planning. So in Prince George, they went from 22% baseline to 47% in the ESAS with the EPIC involved patients, and in Vancouver from 5.5% baseline to 28% in EPIC patients. And this is considered a really great indicator that it's making a difference, that they're being engaged. But we will be honest here that when we do audits of the files, we're not seeing much improvement in full documentation. To be fair, the old system, our case system, it was not easy to necessarily identify the documentation, and there are many different ways that it could be filed or entered. And we're just moving to a Cerner environment now where it's going to be easier, and we have a more standardized way in a standardized place for recording this information, which will be helpful. But there's obviously still some improvement and support that we could provide to make that even better. We also had Diego Sanchez is a palliative physician who's doing his Master's of Public Health in BC under Stewart. And so he, as part of his one of his projects was to work on a sub-analysis of some of our data. And so one of the things that he did was he compared from our ESAS-R data, compared the first visit to the most recent screen available for patients that had multiple screens. And so we saw sort of two trends. Comparing baseline to that period of 2 to 6 months, we did see significant decreases in the ESAS in all items but dyspnea and depression, which is great. It indicates that the reason that they were flagged as being having palliative care needs, it indicates that they really were able to get some good results in their palliative care. But when we look at the full range from baseline, and then the follow-up screens were from, I guess, 1 week up to 20 months, we see overall that only well-being actually maintained significance, although all but dyspnea showed reductions in the scores, which again is a good thing. And this is also great to me, again, interpretation when you're dealing with a population, many of whom, obviously not all, but many may be in their final year of life. And so some of our results actually include people who were doing EPIC screens during their end of life period. So showing that this was really this to me helps show that they were being supported even when the data itself is very difficult to finally interpret. We also have a few results from the EQ5D5L, which is a basic quality of life measure. It's particularly used for economic evaluations, which is something that EPIC will be participating in with other groups across Canada, doing an economic evaluation. And so we have the health utility score that he looked at, and you can see here that the health utility scores, looking at the means or the mode, with the mode being the most commonly selected value, that they really didn't go down much. So even though the p-value shows some significance at 0.025, functionally this is not a big change in the actual health utility score or state, therefore, in the quality of life and function of the patients. The VAS, or the visual analog scale, that's also part of the EQ5D5L, asks patients to rate their sense of their health in the moment from 0 to 100. And you can see here the mean was 0.56 at the baseline and 0.6 at most recent screen. So it's actually gone up a little bit, although the mode really hasn't changed much. But this item particularly is liked by physicians because it gives them a really quick snapshot of how the patient is feeling about themselves and where they're at in the moment. The other thing that we do monitor is the nursing screening response time. And I'm just going to draw your eye to that last line there, 15 minutes or less. So we see that 4 out of 5 sessions are done within those 15 minutes allotted. You have to remember that some of these end up being very complex cases, and nurses have documented up to 125 minutes in their response time for very, very complex cases that were not expected when they came in. So just a sort of thinking back and thinking about our whole block of knowledge coming from the results that we've been monitoring over time, we see that a majority of our patients do present with clusters of higher care needs, and that they certainly do need and benefit from the care that we are giving them. That symptom management really does need to continue throughout their cancer journey. And so that monitoring of it over time and being able to continue to engage and deal with the issues arising is really important. And the standardized measurement of symptoms allows for this analysis of ongoing needs and impacts. So making sure that patients are being asked a full set of questions over time and not just relying on the healthcare provider or the patient to bring up the issues that are just of most concern at the moment, but rather we can gather this data to really understand their journeys. Okay, and now handing it over to Michael.
Thank you. So we quite carefully evaluated patient experience as we've gone with guidance from the patient partners involved in the project. And as I mentioned before, there are many of them. So just some broad sort of overview comments. So most of the patients involved in the project have told us that they like receiving the printout of their trended symptom scores. And you know, many of them do share them with their primary care provider, which was the intent, and also community health nurses and things like that, if those people are involved. So they also like the fact that there's time that's dedicated to reviewing the issues that they're dealing with. You know, with nursing in particular, many of them are familiar with the systems and hadn't been seeing nurses before. So just the fact that somebody's actually checking in with them and dealing with what they're experiencing, it's just been huge for them. And there are things that otherwise wouldn't have been recognized and addressed. And the idea that we're going to check in on all of those things on a regular basis is very appealing to patients and families, to be fair. And they say that it frees them up to address, you know, questions that are more specific to their treatment with their oncologist. So really, the feedback has generally been quite positive. Next slide, Anthony. Could you advance the slide? Oh.
I did. Hang on. It's pretending that I'm not there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And there we go.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
So we've been collecting some quotes. I mean, I won't say this is a qualitative study, but we do collect quotes. So you can see a few of them here, and they really speak to what I was just saying. But I might highlight the one on the right there. I was seeing that, you know, somebody cared. I mean, when I read that, I got a little emotional because, you know, there was a sense that, well, gee, maybe they didn't get a sense somebody cared before they were entered in the project, which obviously wasn't true, but because their issues weren't being assessed and recognized, they felt maybe nobody cared. And you know, the whole idea that it makes the process less stressful, that just being able to go at it in this way, you know, made the whole thing a much more calm affair. So that was helpful. And you know, there's a whole range of other things people have told us. The next slide, Anthony. So, you know, we realized that, you know, trying to do this is a change for cancer care providers and support staff. And so we've made a point of evaluating their experiences. We've gone. Some of that's been in the form of a research project, which we'll talk about a little bit. But in the course of EPIC itself, you know, we've heard a number of things. So many, I will say not all, but many, I'm going to say most of the involved oncologists do like the fact that there's interprofessional support for their patients. And, you know, that's not something that these patients were getting before. And, you know, I'm just going to say, as an oncologist myself, there's this feeling that you're kind of carrying the world on your shoulders a little bit when you know there's this patient burden there and there isn't somebody working with you to help address those issues, and the knowledge that there are things that aren't being addressed. So people appreciated the fact that we're really getting at all of these things that we know exist. And they also like the trending, very useful when seeing patients and issues as well. Nurses, and I should point out that, you know, when I wrote the proposal for CPAC, I said to myself, paradoxical as it seems since I'm a physician, that this really is primarily a nursing intervention, and it honestly is. And so we wanted to make sure that the nurses involved with the project, you know, really felt, you know, positively about it. And generally they did. They very much like the patient feedback, feel that care is much more of a wraparound kind of an approach for the patient and family. You know, and really enjoy working to full scope of practice. And there's some quotes that we'll speak to here, but so basically, nurses who haven't been involved in the project have gotten wind of this and are really hoping to take the EPIC approach on board in their own practices. So I think that's a really positive sign. And that's, of course, what we're aiming to do as BC Cancer enacts its cancer strategy, and as we focus in EPIC on sustainment and spread strategies in our final, not quite a year and a half of the project. Next slide. Now, you know, not all comments have been positive. So some oncologists and nurse practitioners have told us that they don't think it makes any difference to their practice. And, you know, one of the reasons they feel that way is to say they already do a symptom check-in with patients. Now, what many of you will appreciate is the fact that physician-assessed symptom burden underestimates what's actually going on to varying degrees. And I think a lot of oncologists and nurse practitioners probably don't know those data and don't realize that there's a lot of stuff that their symptom check-in misses. And so, you know, you don't want to hit people over the head with that, but as our change management campaign, we've got to think about a lot of things. You know, almost an advertising campaign as we've listed it here. And the points really are to acknowledge the screening they do. You don't want to steamroll that and say, well, what you're doing is a total waste of time. But really to go from that and appreciate what they're doing now, and to say we're going to build on it with this approach in EPIC, and emphasize that EPIC is about you know, standardizing and optimizing the way we're doing that. It's a more complete way to do that, so the patient's needs are truly addressed, and emphasize that it is really about interprofessional collaboration, team-based care. Which, you know, if you say that, most oncologists in the province are feeling kind of stressed. They start listening to you because they're feeling, gosh, it'd be lovely to have some help with all of these issues. And you know, and also getting people familiar with and appreciating the value of the trended results. And so we're figuring out what a so-called advertising campaign might look like as we move forward. Clerks have told us that it is a bit awkward for them if EPIC isn't standard across the board. We have to figure out, okay, what's an EPIC patient, what's not. They're saying it'd be great if it were just integrated as a standard thing across at least large patient subgroups and clinics. I think some form of patient-reported outcome measurement would be good at varying intervals in really all patients. I'm not going to say that what we're doing in EPIC is applicable to all cancer patients by any means, but certainly to high needs patients. I think we're finding it's very valuable. Next slide. So we've done interviews of healthcare providers and support staff. I love the one on the right. I mean, you know, really made me feel good when I saw this. This is how nursing is supposed to practice. That's what we were going for when we started the project. Terrific, really. And you know, I think it's going to be a morale booster once we can spread this as well. And I think that's going to be helpful. Very worn out nursing teams we have these days. And another quote here, patients and families suffer unnecessarily, you know, recognizing that and valuing that we're really trying to address that. And, you know, nursing naturally sort of recognizes the value of functioning as a team in a way that physicians don't always, can row together, move toward a common goal. I mean, this is what we love to hear. And the fact that, you know, really is about optimizing quality of life and satisfaction with care. And I love this quote too. I think that it helps me enjoy my work more. And that is something we need to think about these days. Next slide. So lots of lessons we have learned in the project, which we, as Anthony said, we have shared with other jurisdictions in Canada doing work in our cohort and beyond. Nursing follow-up time clearly varies according to the patient population, the team that they're seeing, and the symptoms that come up. And I get that's known in the literature. That's not new, but it's certainly nice to confirm that in our own experience. And we've got some data that hopefully will inform models of care work that are going to be happening in 2022 across the organization. It's very clear that for EPIC and whatever we do in the future to succeed, we need to optimize the use of time of nurses and clerks, because it is a fixed resort for starters. But also we don't want to duplicate, and we want things to be as efficient as possible for the patient as well. And really, to try and integrate this approach is going to require new workflows, and integrating those workflows into the ones that we're building for this integration of Cerner, which is as Anthony said, our new electronic health record, which has gone live in Vancouver and will be going live in the remaining 5 cancer centers next year. And it's change management to try and integrate this. Requires ongoing engagement. It requires monitoring what's happening, feedback, all of that. And it's to make it succeed, you really have to do all of that work. We've learned that. And to plan for sustainability, we have to really work with all of the disciplines involved in cancer care, and leadership, to be clear. And overall healthcare provider and patient feedback is largely reporting both like strong positive experience overall, most of all in systemic therapy, where things have been stretched even a little bit more thinly with respect to available of nursing. So that was good to hear. Next slide. Oh, did we skip one? So, so Anthony's supposed to be part-time. I don't know how he does that, because there is a lot of work to do. So there's this is the list of next steps that we see for the next not quite 18 months. So to work toward that integration, and really getting the staff, so it's not an extra special thing that's an EPIC thing that's outside what they do, but it is what they do. It is EPIC is routine care. And that's going to take ongoing work. And we do need to continue expansion of EPIC to other patient populations, because the ones we're including at the moment are pretty specific. And so we've had interest in the lung group in Vancouver, for example, and we'll talk a bit more about some other special interests there's been. We are talking about developing an interprofessional group of champions for EPIC work who have done the LEAP training, they've done the serious illness conversation, they're familiar with EPIC, they've done it, and can help spread the work, but also be a resource for people who are just getting into it and need advice. And we'll need to build that out in the other 4 cancer centers that are not involved in EPIC at the moment. So lots of work to do there. That's work that we've kind of begged, borrowed, and stolen a little bit from Nova Scotia. And again, it's one of the advantages to working with CPAC sometimes is you can get these ideas and adapt them. So we know we're going to have to really explore all these opportunities for requests to use EPIC, but including research projects, and we'll talk a little bit about that, I think, in the subsequent slides. And that we know that they're high needs patients that have curable cancers, as mentioned before. We started with patients with incurable cancers in EPIC, but head and neck cancer, for example, receiving chemoradiation. I mean, we could see there'd be lots of advantages to an approach of this general sort. And really just think about how we can integrate EPIC into, the improvements and models of care that we hope will be developed in 2022 and how we're going to do that. Now, there is discussion of getting a patient portal for PHSA and BC Cancer. That's really going to help us a lot. considering the nature of the patient population we're dealing with, but also geography. For if people can complete patient-reported outcome measures from home in advance, that would be huge. And there's some really interesting work in Alberta where they've done that, and they can plan for the appointment, for example, so they can have more or less time scheduled with the nurse, and different things can be scheduled depending on what the patient's reported. So, you know, the digital health priority for the cancer strategy is something we'd like to support when it's operationalized next year. Next slide. So lots of research collaborations of various sorts. So I'll just highlight these. One direct offshoot of the project was a qualitative study looking at caregiver reported outcomes. And I see Linda Carlson's on the call. We've talked about that nationally, the Canadian Cancer Trials Group. There's been discussion at CPAC about this. Our project has indicated certainly some potential opportunities there. But there's some nuance to it as well. So we think there's a lot of foundational work that probably needs to be done, but loads of really interesting findings. This was a great collaboration with Fuchsia Howard at the School of Nursing at UBC, and a lot of other people were involved in that. So several publications are coming out. We've got one out already. So another offshoot of it was we've gotten a Convene and Collaborate grant from the Michael Smith Foundation for Health Research to develop a research program looking at health equity oriented cancer care. And that's a very broad concept, of course, but that's what our engagement sessions within the project are going to look at, is how are we going to scope that? But it really began when we thought about marginalized populations. We targeted Prince George, as Anthony mentioned, to look at rural, remote, and Indigenous care. In Vancouver, we thought about it with respect to marginalized populations in the downtown east side. We haven't necessarily done as much with that within EPIC as I'd like to do, but in any case, the spin-off was the C2 work that we're going to be doing starting really soon. And it really has already started. So we are working with the BC Centre for Palliative Care on the serious illness conversation education. We are going to be working with a UBC medical student in the Faculty of Medicine Flex program to evaluate the impact of serious illness conversations on cancer care provider practice. So that's, and we think there'll be a publication coming out of that. There was a qualitative study done at BC Cancer Surrey, getting perceptions of patients and nurses to do with eliciting patient-reported outcome measures. So there's a publication that's coming out of that. There's been some learnings that we're going to adopt in EPIC moving forward as well. Finally, I don't know if this has been presented to this group before. This is led by Howie Lim and
Cheryl Ho.
Cheryl Ho, thank you. I'm losing my mind. Two medical oncologists here in Vancouver. And it's a much larger project looking at precision oncology. But, you know, I'm just delighted when Cheryl approached us and asked us to integrate EPIC into this work, because there's an idea that they want to provide patient care in the project, but also there's a health economic component. So the EQ5D is going to be part of that. So that's really exciting. And, you know, there's others that are reaching out to us as well. For instance, Dr. Renouf, who has a major research interest in pancreatic cancer, is interested in this as well. So lots of different spin-offs and research activity that's come out of it. So next slide. So I really would like to reiterate thanks to a lot of people who have worked on this, patient partners, busy cancer care providers, leaders from across the organization, and also our community care partners. So grateful. And also like to highlight the work that Diego Sanchez, as you mentioned Diego earlier, but also Anu Kriti-Tiwari, who is working with our analytics team, has done a lot to support what we're doing. And thanks to all of you for listening to us today. And I'm glad to see we have not quite 15 minutes for questions. So thank you very much.